Every few weeks, the moon turns full silent, silver, watching. Today, it's just a light in the sky. But centuries ago, it was a sign of madness, of werewolves, of sudden deaths and sick children. In medieval Europe, the full moon wasn't beautiful, it was feared. Priests warned of demons. Doctors blamed it for seizures. And entire villages changed their routines to hide from its power. This is not a story about science. It's a story about belief, fear, and how one glowing circle ruled the dark corners of the medieval mind. For the people of medieval Europe, the sky was not a cold vacuum of stars. It was alive, watching, and full of meaning. Long before telescopes or scientific charts, the heavens were seen as the realm of divine order and supernatural warning. The moon, in particular, stood apart. Its changing phases marked time, influenced calendars, and shaped entire belief systems. When it turned full, glowing high above the villages and forests, it was not just light, it was a sign dot in a world without artificial lighting. The full moon transformed night into something otherworldly. Its presence was powerful, almost intrusive. For peasants and nobles alike, it wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a message, sometimes comforting, often threatening. The regular rhythm of its cycle gave it authority. Its timing seemed to correspond with events that people couldn't control: fevers, seizures, violent outbursts, births, and deaths. Medieval Christian doctrine taught that God ruled the cosmos, but the devil worked in the margins, and the full moon was often placed somewhere between. Clergy interpreted celestial bodies as instruments of divine will, or, in darker moments, as veils through which evil forces acted. Astrology, though often criticized by church leaders, was widely practiced even by clerics. The moon's position could signify a bad harvest, a coming war, or moral decay in a community. Monks and priests warned congregations to stay vigilant on full moon nights, when demons were thought to wander and the veil between spiritual realms grew thin. The association between the moon and madness was strong and widely accepted. The Latin root luna gave birth to the term lunatacus, used in medical texts to describe those believed to be mentally disturbed during certain phases of the moon. The moon, it was believed, could draw moisture from the brain the same way it pulled the tides. Doctors trained in Galenic medicine, influenced by ancient Greek and Roman texts, believed the moon affected the four humus, especially the balance of black bile and phlegm, which they linked to melancholy and hysteria. In rural villages, oral traditions shaped even stronger beliefs. Farmers might delay planting or harvesting based on lunar cycles. Families might avoid travel during the full moon, fearing that unnatural beings roamed the roads. Across Europe, tales passed down through generations warned of curses, transformations, or unexplainable deaths tied to moonlit nights. Folklore was not entertainment. It was a survival manual in an unpredictable world. No division existed between the physical and the spiritual. The moon was not just a rock orbiting Earth, it was a force, unpredictable and charged with meaning. Every glow in the night sky was part of a vast, invisible drama. And in that drama, the full moon was never neutral. It was a presence that demanded attention. By the Middle Ages, the link between the moon and human behavior had taken deep root in medical theory. Physicians, following the traditions of Galen and Hippocrates, believed that celestial bodies, especially the moon, directly influenced a human body and mind. The term lunaticus, meaning moonstruck, wasn't just poetic, it was dynastic. Doctors across Europe used it to classify mental disturbances believed to spike during the full moon. This belief wasn't fringe, it was mainstream. Medical scholars taught at the universities of Paris, Bologna, and Salerno, all reinforcing the theory that the moon's cycle could disturb the brain's balance. Galenic medicine explained this through the system of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health depended on these fluids staying in harmony. The moon, thought to control moisture in nature, was also believed to affect the moisture content in the brain. Too much moisture, or its improper movement, could cause seizures, confusion, hysteria, and even coma. In 1290, the Italian physician Pietro d'Urbano wrote Conciliator Differentiarum, in which he claimed the moon exerts influence on the brain and thus on the emotions. He wasn't alone. Medical texts circulated across Christian and Islamic worlds, translated from Arabic into Latin, reinforcing the lunar connection. Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, widely used in European medical schools, repeated the belief that the moon could trigger disturbances of the soul. Hospitals, especially those that treated the mentally ill-kept track of lunar phases. Records from Bethlehem Hospital in London, later known as Bedlam, include references to increased agitation among patients during full moons, though correlation wasn't statistically tested by modern standards. These observations shaped treatment plans and influenced the scheduling of procedures, especially for those suffering from epilepsy or fever. One notable case was recorded in the early 14th century by the English chronicler Ranulph Higden in his poem. He wrote of a man in Cheshire who raved with the voice of beasts and struck at shadows only on nights when the moon was full. The local physician attributed this to the pull of the moon upon his humors. Whether fabricated or misinterpreted, it reflects the accepted medical logic of the time. Even legal systems absorbed the idea. In English common law, a defendant labeled non compos mentis due to lunar influence might be considered temporarily insane. Some courts recognize lunacy as a condition distinct from other forms of madness, tied specifically to the moon's phases. This influenced sentencing, confinement, and treatment, further embedding lunar fear into institutional response. Religious figures didn't object. In fact, many saw lunar madness as part of divine order. God, they believed, could use the moon to punish, test, or warn. Sermons and religious commentaries often portrayed the full moon as a mirror of the soul, exposing hidden sins or unleashing suppressed impulses. The line between natural and supernatural, medical and moral, remained thin. In a world without artificial light, where the sky dictated daily rhythms, the full moon stood out. Its glow didn't just light the path, it stirred ancient fears, confirmed medical theories, and shaped how medieval society understood the human mind. The madness wasn't random, it was expected, predictable, cyclical, and, to the physicians of the age, entirely reasonable. In medieval Europe, the Church was more than a religious institution. It was the central force that shaped how people viewed the world, life, death, the stars above, and the threats below. Within that worldview, the full moon stood on dangerous ground. While not condemned outright, it was viewed with glow, seen not as neutral light, but as a potential instrument of darkness. Church leaders interpreted celestial phenomena through the lens of scripture and theology. The moon's light, unlike the sun's, was considered reflected and unstable, much like the human soul under temptation. Augustine of Hippo had written centuries earlier that the moon's changing face symbolized inconsistency and moral weakness. By the High Middle Ages, these symbolic interpretations became deeply rooted in sermons and liturgical thought. The moon was never accused of being evil itself, but the full moon was believed to provide cover for evil deeds. It was associated with nights of excess, unclean spirits, and sudden violence. Some clerics warned that Satan operated more freely under the full moon's glare, not because it was dark, but because its presence stirred human weakness. Preachers in 12th and 13th century France and England referenced the moon when speaking of temptation, often linking it to nocturnal sins, lust, drunkenness, theft. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued the Bull Vox in Rama, which included vivid descriptions of heretical rites supposedly performed under the full moon. Though aimed at specific groups like the Cathars and supposed devil worshippers, the text echoed broader fears that lunar phases played a role in ritual impurity. The timing of these accusations was not arbitrary. Many confessions extracted under torture during inquisitions placed unholy gatherings on moonlit nights where visibility was high and suspicion ran deeper. Liturgical calendars reflected this fear. While the moon determined the date of Easter, the Church's most important feast care was taken with the full moon's alignment. Lesser-known festivals, particularly those linked to local saints or relic processions, were sometimes deliberately scheduled to avoid the full moon. Some dioceses postponed public penitential acts if they coincided with a full moon, fearing disruption or spiritual risk. The Benedictine monk Bede, writing in the 8th century, noted that early Christian calendars intentionally separated days of fasting and prayer from lunar high points. Later, monastic traditions followed suit, with some abbeys imposing stricter silence or isolation rules on nights when the moon was at its brightest. Popular belief, reinforced by the Church's moral framing, saw the full moon as a time when boundaries blurred. Stories circulated of witches, though not yet the targets of formal witch hunts, using the full moon to collect herbs or cast spells. By the 14th century, texts like the Speculum Maleficarum hinted at lunar timing in magical rites association. The Church would later seize upon in prosecuting heresy. What began as theological caution grew into doctrine-backed fear. The Church never officially declared the full moon demonic, but its cultural messaging through sermons, punishments, and sacred calendars left no doubt. In the medieval Christian imagination, light was not always good. The full moon's glow could just as easily illuminate the path of sin. By the 12th century, stories of shapeshifters, men who became beasts under the full moon, were spreading. Across Europe, the belief was neither isolated nor dismissed. In some regions, it became part of local justice. In others, it seeped into religious fears, medical assumptions, and nightly routines. The werewolf, or lycanthrope, was not simply a myth, was a recognized explanation for disappearances, mutilated bodies, and violent behavior. The term werewolf comes from Old English werman and wolf, but the phenomenon extended beyond. Language: in France, they were called loup-garou. In German lands, werewolf. In Slavic regions, vuk. While the details varied, one element remained consistent: the full moon was the trigger. This belief was reinforced not by fantasy, but by actual cases recorded in court documents, chroniclers, accounts, and ecclesiastical reports. One of the earliest surviving legal references comes from the Capitulary of Charlemagne in the 8th century. In it, the emperor outlawed the practice of burning suspected werewolves, implying that it was a known occurrence in Frankish territories. The Church condemned belief in shape-shifting as pagan superstition. Yet such condemnations only highlighted its persistence in 1521. In Poligny, France, a man named Pierre Bergot was accused of lycanthropy. Under torture, he confessed to making a pact with the devil and transforming into a wolf during full moons. Alongside Michel Verdun, another accused werewolf, Bergot described how they stalked the woods, attacked travelers, and consumed human flesh. Both men were executed by burning. These confessions were used not as proof of innocence by delusion, but as validation that the devil could manipulate flesh. The connection between the moon and transformation was strengthened by patterns in rural violence. In areas without strong central authority, nighttime attacks were hard to investigate. Livestock found torn apart, children gone missing. Bodies discovered mauled. These were often attributed to beasts, and sometimes to humans turned into beasts. The full moon, offering both visibility and atmosphere, became the most logical time for such horror to unfold. In Estonia, trial records from the late 17th century show villagers accusing individuals of turning into wolves during full moons. These accusations weren't whispered rumors. They were brought before courts, sometimes ending in execution. The folkloric consistency across regions that had little contact suggests a shared belief system reinforced by fear and oral tradition. Even outside formal trials, local legends repeated the pattern. In parts of rural Germany, men were said to rub their bodies with special salves under the full moon to transform. In Scotland, certain stones or springs were believed to trigger the change. And in Livonium, modern-day Latvia, and Estonia, court transcripts describe men claiming they transformed at night to battle witches in animal form. These beliefs blurred the lines between folklore, heresy, and criminality. The full moon didn't just light the landscape. It became the symbol of uncontrollable change, of instincts overtaking reason. For medieval communities, already surrounded by danger and disease, the idea that a man could become something monstrous under the moon wasn't a fantasy, it was a warning. In the countryside of medieval Europe, the rhythms of daily life followed forces beyond human control. The rising sun, the changing seasons, and above all, the phases of the moon. For peasants who made up the overwhelming majority of the population, the moon was not a distant object. It was a presence, one that guided when to sow, when to reap, and when to fear what might be lurking just beyond the tree line. Full moons, in particular, were treated with caution. In parts of rural England and northern France, agricultural calendars were often marked not just with saints' feast days, but with lunar phases. Planting root crops during a waxing moon was thought to lead to rot. Harvesting grain under a full moon could anger unseen spirits or draw bad luck. These weren't arbitrary customs, they were inherited through generations, shaped by experience, oral tradition, and religious influence. In village life, childbirth was both sacred and dangerous. A full moon night could delay midwives from traveling, not out of logistics, but out of fear. It was believed that babies born under the full moon were more likely to grow into thieves or heretics, or worse, suffer a short and troubled life. In some Slavic regions, mothers would hang iron tools or Christian relics in the birthing room to ward off malevolent forces believed to grow stronger under the moonlight. Superstitions crossed regional and cultural lines. In the Germanic countryside, farmers avoided looking directly at the full moon, fearing it could cause eye diseases or madness. In the Iberian Peninsula, shepherds refused to herd at night when the moon was full, believing it increased the chances of animal attack. Unexplained disappearances. Oral accounts preserved in Catalonia warned children to avoid moonlight during sleep, claiming it could cause permanent deformities or illness. Moonlight was also connected to death. Omens were a constant part of rural belief systems, and the full moon was among the most powerful. If a person died during a full moon, it was said their soul would struggle to find peace. In some cases, families delayed burials until the moon waned, especially if the deceased had died by violence or sudden illness. A full moon halo created by atmospheric ice crystals was taken as a direct sign of an impending death or war. Such signs were whispered about in churchyards and taverns alike, feeding cycles of anxiety in already uncertain times. Rituals adapted to these fears. In certain parts of Wales and Brittany, night prayers were altered on full moon evenings. Bells were rung slightly earlier, windows shut tight, and livestock brought in before dark. Though the church did not officially sanction these practices, it often tolerated them, understanding that for peasants, these rituals brought a sense of control in a chaotic world. The moon's light revealed more than landscapes. It exposed belief, caution, and inherited memory. For the medieval peasant, it was neither romantic nor meaningless. It was a signal, a warning, something to observe but never trust. In medieval thought, the moon was more than a celestial body. It was a force intimately connected to the female body. Its cycles mirrored the menstrual cycle, and that coincidence shaped centuries of belief about women, nature, and control. In a world dominated by male, religious, and legal institutions, the moon's tie to fertility and femininity carried both mystique and threat. Medical texts from the period, following Galenic and Hippocratic traditions, described menstruation as a purging of humors regulated by lunar phases. The Trotula, a widely used 12th century medical compendium focused on women's health, instructed practitioners to monitor the moon when treating conditions related to fertility or pregnancy. Some midwives, often viewed with suspicion by the church, aligned their remedies and interventions with the moon's waxing and waning. When a birth went wrong or a child was stillborn, it wasn't unusual for blame to land not only on the woman, but on the timing of the moon. This association became dangerous when paired with rising paranoia about witchcraft. By the late 15th century, accusations of sorcery were increasingly linked to lunar rituals. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer, described how witches gathered under the full moon to perform rites tied to fertility, lust, and blasphemy. While it offered no evidence beyond confession and superstition, the book's influence was widespread. Courts and inquisitors across Europe began to look for lunar patterns in alleged acts of witchcraft. Trial records from the early 16th century in Switzerland, Scotland, and parts of Germany frequently included claims that women used full moons to draw down power-harvesting herbs, cursing livestock, or summoning spirits. In 1591, during the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland, Agnes Sampson was accused of using moonlight to conjure storms intended to sink the ship of King James VI. Her confession, extracted under torture, described gatherings held under moonlit skies, with rituals timed to lunar phases. The moon became a symbol of hidden female knowledge that could not be explained through church doctrine or male scholarship. Midwives, herbalists, and widows living alone were particularly vulnerable. In some cases, the presence of almanacs or lunar calendars in a woman's home was used as evidence of occult practice. Even local legends reinforced the fear. In Bavarian villages, stories spread of moon witches who could cause miscarriages. by pointing at a pregnant woman under a full moon. In parts of rural France, men were warned not to let their wives bathe or sleep outdoors during a full moon, lest they be cursed or transformed. These warnings weren't fringe beliefs, were passed from pulpit to household and folded into law. Behind the fear was a deeper tension. The moon represented cycles that men couldn't regulate, and women's bodies connected to those cycles remained a source of unease in a patriarchal society. The moon's influence, real or imagined, gave women power that authorities wanted to suppress. When the flames of witch trials rose across Europe, it wasn't only fear of heresy or crime. It was fear of the unexplained, the uncontrollable, and the ancient bond between the moon and those who lived by its rhythm. Medieval cities, from London to Lubeck, faced the same problem. Crime thrived under darkness, and when the moon was full, the risks didn't disappear, they changed. With more light came more activity. In a time before gas lamps or organized police forces, a moonlit night made the streets navigable. But it also gave criminals the cover they needed. By the 13th century, city councils across Europe had begun recording incidents that clustered around full moons. In England, town watchmen were instructed to be especially alert during those nights. London's city rolls from the late 1200s mention extra patrols assigned when the moon was at its brightest, a direct response to a pattern of increased nighttime disturbances. The belief was simple and widely held. The moon didn't just light. The street tick changed behavior. Medical theory gave this fear a foundation. Influenced by Galenic models of bodily humors, physicians claimed that the moon's pull on bodily fluids caused agitation, restlessness, and irrational behavior. This explanation merged easily with religious ideas about sin and temptation, especially when it came to acts committed under cover of night. A person who killed or assaulted during a full moon was not only guilty, they were seen as having given in to an elemental madness. In 1302, records from the French city of Rouen describe a case in which a butcher murdered a fellow guild member following a tavern dispute. Witnesses claimed the man had eyes like silver and spoke incoherently, and the judge's commentary noted the full moon as a condition of madness. While no scientific proof was offered, the belief that the moon affected the mind shaped how authorities handled such cases. Rural communities adopted their own methods. In parts of the Holy Roman Empire, villagers believed thieves and bandits timed their raids to the lunar cycle. In response, some towns held curfews during full moons, not during darkness. Church bells were used to signal the end of safe movement, and anyone found outside after that was subject to arrest or, in some cases, violent reprisal. This wasn't limited to petty crime. In the 15th century, Milanese city records show that violent crimes, especially assaults and homicides, peaked during full moon nights. Similar patterns were noted in Lubeck and parts of Flanders, while modern criminologists debate the reliability of such data. The people at the time didn't need convincing. For them, the pattern confirmed what they had always suspected. The moon influenced behavior, especially bad behavior. Punishments also reflected this thinking. In 1328, in Siena, a man accused of attempted robbery claimed to have no memory of the event, blaming the moon for his condition. The court reduced his sentence, citing his previous good standing and the disordered state of his humors due to the moon's strength. While not common, such decisions show how embedded the belief had become. The full moon brought visibility but also unease. In a world already shaped by fear, hunger, and unstable order, even a little more light could become dangerous. And when the moon reached its peak, few trusted what might follow. On the night of June 18, 1178, 5 men in Canterbury watched the crescent moon distort and flare with light. Chronicler Gervas of Canterbury recorded their testimony, describing the moon suffering a violent shaking. Across Christendom, such celestial anomalies were never dismissed as chance. When the moon darkened or turned red, especially during a full moon, fear swept through towns and villages like wildfire. Lunar eclipses during the medieval period were events of intense psychological and cultural weight. They were rare, poorly understood, and often terrifying. For people living under the authority of both church and superstition, a blood-red moon was never seen as a natural occurrence. It was a message divine, ominous, and dangerous. In 1133, just before the death of King Henry I of England, a lunar eclipse turned the night sky dark over much of Western Europe. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described it as a moon as black as pitch, followed shortly after by the king's fatal illness and widespread unrest over succession. The connection, in the minds of chroniclers and subjects alike, was clear. The heavens had warned of catastrophe during the Black Death in the mid-14th century. Many believed that a lunar eclipse seen shortly before the outbreak was a celestial sign of God's judgment. In Florence, chroniclers described the moon red as blood in the weeks before the pestilence arrived. Though modern science understands the causes of both plague and eclipses, such separation didn't exist in medieval thinking. The sky mirrored the fate of the world below the church, offered interpretations, but rarely comfort. A blood moon was seen as a harbinger of divine wrath linked to sin, heresy, or unrepented evil. Scripture reinforced this idea. The book of Joel warned that the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Clergy used these events to urge repentance. Bells tolled through the night, churches filled with panicked villagers, and processions were organized in the streets. In some cases, panic turned to violence. In 1485, a partial lunar eclipse occurred shortly before the outbreak of sweating sickness in England. Rumors spread that the disease was a curse triggered by sin in the royal court. In Strasbourg, in 1504, a red moon prompted accusations against local Jewish communities, linking them to supposed ritual crimes. No evidence existed, only fear, intensified by a sky gone wrong. Even rulers responded. Emperor Louis the Bavarian, during a lunar eclipse in 1345, ordered his court astrologers to explain the event. Their report linked the eclipse to an impending war with the papacy, an interpretation he welcomed, as it suited his political aims. Elsewhere, monarchs viewed eclipses as signs of betrayal, uprisings, or imminent death. Few events united illiterate peasants, educated monks, and ruling elites in common dread. A lunar eclipse did. When the moon vanished or bled red, the world below held its breath, convinced that something irreversible had been set in motion. In 21st century hospitals across North America and Europe, emergency rooms often report an uptick in admissions. During full moons, nurses speak of busier nights, patients behaving strangely, or psychiatric cases flaring without clear explanation. Some hospitals even schedule extra staff, anticipating chaos. Yet when data is examined, the correlation between lunar phases and medical emergencies remains inconclusive. Still, the belief persists not only in folklore, but in institutional behavior. Police departments in cities like Miami, Los Angeles, and Brighton have historically increased patrols during full moons. A 2007 memo from the Sussex Police in the UK recommended adding officers during lunar peaks, citing the potential for extra disorder. Similar measures have been documented in other departments, despite no consistent evidence linking moonlight to crime rates. The idea survives because it's familiar, expected and, in some cases, self-fulfilling. Psychology also struggles with the legacy. In surveys, a significant portion of the public across Western countries believes the full moon influences mood, sleep, and mental health. Studies often debunk the connection, but the perception remains. In psychiatric wards, the belief in lunar impact has influenced everything from patient evaluations to restraint protocols. Popular culture reinforces these patterns. Horror films use the full moon as shorthand for transformation, madness, and violence. From An American Werewolf in London to countless vampire stories, the image of a glowing moon remains a visual cue for danger. It taps into centuries-old fears, encoded in religious sermons, medieval court records, and village rituals. Even language holds the imprint. The term lunatic, rooted in the Latin luna, still appears in legal and colloquial speech. Though outdated in psychiatry, it's a reminder that for most of history, mental illness was seen through the lens of celestial influence. The moon wasn't distant, it was an actor, one that could sway the body, warp the mind, or signal divine warning. These echoes reveal a deeper truth. Belief often outlasts the facts that challenge it. In medieval Europe, the moon was feared because it represented the unknown. In the modern world, lit by streetlights, tracked by satellites, and explained by science, it still holds a place. In the collective imagination, the question is not whether the moon changes human behavior. It's whether the belief that it does is powerful enough to shape reality anyway.